Okay, so the Palestinian Authority just dropped a massive bombshell about Gaza. And they've done it in such a subtle way that, in fact, mainstream media completely missed it, and it went over the head of most political commentators. What I'm about to show you right here, I guarantee you've never heard anywhere else. I'm not regurgitating news. I'm not reading somebody else's analysis. This is all coming from here, and trust me, this one you want to hear. So, as fighting in Gaza continues, there's a parallel conversation that goes on almost on a daily basis. Who's going to own Gaza the day after? Once the war is over, who's going to be the ruler of Gaza? Now, so far, the obvious candidates basically said no. Egypt said, probably not. And Jordan came out yesterday saying, don't even look at us. There's no chance in hell we're coming anywhere near Gaza. And now, the Palestinian Authority has done something that basically de facto says, no, not us, don't look at us. But not in such a obvious way, and I'll explain that in a second. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a journey. Number one, I'll show you what the Palestinian Authority did and how they've gotten out, or at least trying to get out of ruling Gaza the day after. And I think the more important question, which I'll show you an answer to, is that why nobody wants to own Gaza. When this whole thing started, the State Department saw the Palestinian Authority as the most natural candidate to come in and rule Gaza along with the West Bank. And they've been very vocal about this, much to the dismay of the Israelis, because they don't want that. And I've explained why I think the Israelis are right about it. But the Palestinian Authority, which is basically the PLO, said, look, we are willing to take Gaza under one condition. And that condition is a country that unifies the West Bank with Gaza. An impossible demand that in this climate is surely going to get denied and they're going to get thrown out of the stairs. So the idea was, let's make an offer to the United States, which the Israelis will never accept. And that way we can say we agreed, but our conditions were not met, so we couldn't take Gaza. Let's get out of it in a more sophisticated way by not just saying no. Much to the surprise of the Palestinians, the State Department basically said, yes, sure, let's do it. Now, they did not expect the Americans to come back with a positive answer about this, so they started to come up with a second plan of how to get out of having to rule Gaza, because they definitely don't want it, and I'll explain in a second why. So the solution they came up with, we saw yesterday, and it was very sophisticated. Almost a month and a half after the terror attacks of October 7th, they've remembered that they want to comment on what happened October 7th. And they put out an official statement by the Palestinian Authority, literally saying, that never happened. Israelis are lying. It was the Israelis who have killed their own citizens. Done. Official statement by the Palestinian Authority. Why put out this official statement now? Middle of November. This happened on October 7th. Why say something so outrageous, so unacceptable on the Israeli side? Basically accusing the Israelis of killing their own 1,400 civilians now. Well, the reason they've done it on the Palestinian side is because the Palestinian Authority basically is trying to torpedo the play in which it has to rule over Gaza. They don't want it. They've tried making an impossible offer to America, in which the State Department said yes, surprisingly. So now they're trying to torpedo it by saying something so outrageous, so unacceptable on the Israeli side, that there's no way that the State Department can package the Palestinian Authority as a good solution to the Israelis. Now, the question is, did it work? We'll find out. But I think the more interesting question is why? Why the Egyptians? Why the Jordanians? Why the Palestinian Authority are all basically saying, no, thank you. Well, you see, Gaza, over the past 100 years, had 5 rulers. And every single one of them ate a shit sandwich because of owning Gaza. The British, the Egyptians, the Israelis, the PLO, and yes, even the Hamas. Did you know that in 1988, the Jordanians literally said, hey, this piece of land that is literally part of Jordan, we've annexed this in 1951, right? The West Bank, you can have it, the Israelis. We no longer want it. Why did the Jordanians waive the entire West Bank to the Israelis in 1988? Why did the Egyptians refuse to take Gaza back from the Israelis when the Israelis basically told them in 1977, hey, take Sinai and Gaza and let's make peace? And the Egyptians said, no, we don't want Gaza. You can keep it. It's a gift from us. Why did the Egyptians push Gaza on the Israelis? Why did the Jordanians push the West Bank on the Israelis? In 1948, when the United Nations basically offered the partition plan, dividing the land of Palestine into an Arab nation and a nation for the Jews said, bet. They called it Israel. The Arabs said, no way, Jose. They've declared war on the Israelis. Now, once the Arabs declared war on the Israelis, all bets were off. The Israelis ended up winning, took a bunch of the lands that was supposed to go to the Arabs. But not a lot of people are talking about this. But while the Israelis were taking the spoils of war, the Egyptians and the Jordanians were also taking their spoils of war. The Jordanians took the West Bank from the Arab country, and the Egyptians took Gaza from the Arab country. So the spoils of war, the failed Arab attack on the Jews, were divided between Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. Now, the Arab population in the new state of Israel in 1948 was unsure of how this Israeli government and the Israeli military is going to treat the population. And a lot of them feared retribution from the Israeli military because they started the war and they treated the Jews in a very aggressive manner. And a lot of them didn't trust the Israelis to be nice, and a lot of them ran. Some of them stayed, some of them ran. Now, the ones who ran to Gaza. And overnight in 1948, Gaza becomes a 200,000 people enclave. Instead of 70,000, 200,000 overnight. By the way, now it's 2 million, but that's a whole different story. And at that point, Gaza is controlled by the Egyptians, but the Egyptians are smart enough not to annex Gaza to Egypt. They say, nope, this is not ours. We're just holding on to this. They've installed martial law in Egypt and never treated it as part of the Egyptian land. Now, terror attacks start as soon as the 1950s in Egypt, in Israel from Gaza. And in 1967, when a war breaks out between the Egyptians and the Israelis take back Gaza and take back the Sinai Peninsula. And in 1967, Israel suddenly becomes the owner of Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula. At the same time, it also takes the West Bank from Jordan. Now, just to kind of give you a history lesson, Jordan and Egypt and Syria all attacked Israel at the same time in 1967, but they've lost a lot of land. Now, at that point, terror attacks against Israel from Gaza become even more harsh. The Palestinian resistance movement starts to get more and more militant, more and more vicious. And at this point, the Israelis try to broker some sort of a peace deal. Because in 1987, 1988, they start an actual rebellion. It's causing a lot of death, a lot of noise. So the Israelis are literally trying to negotiate with an organization that was defined as a terrorist organization, the PLO, that was in Lebanon, started a civil war in Lebanon, was exiled to Tunisia. So with the idea of bringing it back, rebranding it, and with US support, they basically started to negotiate with the PLO. And they said, look, PLO, we're going to give you administrative civilian control over Gaza and the West Bank. That was in 1993. And at that point, that's the crazy part. As the PLO negotiating with the Israeli government to get parts of West Bank and Gaza as administrative control by the PLO, the entire time, Hamas does crazy terrorist attacks, trying to torpedo the whole peace agreement. And eventually, it actually leads to the assassination of the Israeli prime minister because the Israelis were very pissed, some at least, that he was not doing anything about these terrorist attacks because he was trying to keep the peace deal alive. A whole mess, Israeli politics, not going to get into that. But in 1993, they do sign a peace deal, and the PLO becomes the administrator of Gaza and these parts of the West Bank. In 2005, the Israelis said, we had enough. They pull out of Gaza completely. They take out all the 10,000 civilians who live in the settlements in Gaza. They root all of them out. Every single soldier is out. Not a single soldier, not a single settler in Gaza since 2005. And at that point, the PLO, which is now the fourth ruler of Gaza, count with me here, British, Egyptians, Israelis, and now the PLO, fourth ruler of Gaza since 1917. In 1993, the PLO takes over as a full-on sovereign of Gaza in 2005. And of course, Hamas also torpedoes that. In 2006, just a year later, they win a legitimate election by popular vote and immediately kill every single PLO operative in Gaza, murders all of them, and never has another elections again. And now we're at the fifth ruler of Gaza in 100 years, and that ruler has never stopped being at war with Israel ever since, and that's a fact. To this day, we're seeing these results. Now, the question is, why now nobody wants to take it after Hamas is gone? So let's start with Egypt first, because Egypt is probably the best candidate to actually change their minds. But right now, it seems like a very, very far option. You see, the Egyptians were actually the birthplace of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's started as a social movement, a small minority, but then, developed to whatever it developed right now. The Muslim Brotherhood is kind of the inspiration of Hamas. It's where they come from. It's their concept. So if you say Hamas, just say the Gaza branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, okay? So the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt has been a destabilizing force for many, many years, since the 1940s. They've tried to coup the government in 1948, 1954, 1965. In 2011, they've managed to overthrow the government and put in the Muslim Brotherhood president, but then the military basically got it back in 2013. And ever since then, they've outlawed, 2013, they outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood. They have a secular government, but the Muslim Brotherhood is still very, very much active, and it's a huge destabilizing agent of chaos in Egypt. And ever since then, they've been carrying out multiple terror attacks on Egyptian soil against soldiers, civilians. They've assassinated the Attorney General with the help of the Hamas, by the way, in 2015. So the entire terrorist operations and the Muslim Brotherhood operations in Egypt are basically with the conjunction of Hamas. Hamas is working with ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula. So Hamas has been causing a lot of problems for Egypt, destabilizing the whole country from afar. For the Egyptians, the idea of bringing Hamas, or whatever it's going to be branded after Hamas is gone, bringing Palestinian resistance, bringing Muslim Brotherhood into Egypt and making it live in the same place of ISIS and the local Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood is basically suicide. It is an existential threat to the future of Egypt as a secular country. It's going to be the end of Egypt as we know it. And they understand that. That is why they do not want to govern it, because that will essentially mean that Hamas will have, or whatever comes after Hamas, great ties with the ISIS, and they'll have a lot of movement into Egypt. They don't want that. And they certainly are not willing to take any refugees, because they don't want any of these guys, the Muslim Brotherhood, in Egypt. That, of course, can change if the Israelis can prove to Egypt that they've not only killed Hamas, that they've eliminated the Muslim Brotherhood concept from within Gaza. If they can prove that this is no longer Muslim Brotherhood land, then Egypt might actually move. And that's why I said in my previous video that once Egypt agrees to play ball with Israel here, that's where you know that Hamas is finally gone. Now, the Jordanians, they certainly want none of this. You see, the Jordanians basically collaborated with Israel since 1948. In fact, in 1951, the Jordanian king was on its way to meet some Israeli officials, and he was assassinated in Jerusalem by a Palestinian terrorist attack. So, the one thing to understand about Jordan as a country, that it's basically Palestinian. 70% of Jordanians are Palestinians. The rulers of Jordan are not Palestinians. They're a small, tiny Hashemite minority that was imported to Jordan from Iraq. The existence of Jordan in its current configuration is dependent on the goodwill of Hamas. If Hamas decides to topple the Jordanian government using the 70% Palestinians, angry Palestinians in Jordan, they can. So the only thing that's preventing the Palestinians from basically toppling the Jordanian government is the fact that they don't want to do it. And that's why Jordan is like, we're not getting anywhere near this. That is why Jordan literally gave Israel the West Bank, saying, hey, you take these Palestinians, we don't want them. Because they knew that if they keep the West Bank will develop a sort of Hamas 2.0 and it will topple their own government. So the Jordanians see this as an existential threat, much like Egypt. So what you need to understand here is that Jordan and Egypt would like nothing more than Hamas to be gone and that the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood concepts will be eradicated from Gaza and the West Bank. They both really, really want them gone, but they can't say it. They're certainly not going to be perceived as collaborators with Israel in the day after, unless they will be 100% certain that Gaza is going through a whole new process of denazification, de-Hamasization, whatever you want to call it. And that's a tough thing to achieve. It's a tall order. Now, the Palestinian Authority basically says to itself, look, we had this problem. We were there. Within a year, they kicked us out because you see, Hamas is not the problem. The problem is that Gaza Palestinians are not the same as West Bank Palestinians. There's ethnicity differences there. There's certain differences there. So the people of Gaza also lived separately from the people of the West Bank for the past 20 years. So if they're saying to themselves, look, if we step over there right now and we come in as Israeli collaborators, what's going to happen? They're going to kill us again. They're going to uprise, they're going to kill us, and we may actually lose the West Bank because of what happens in Gaza. This time, because now it's going to be unified West Bank plus Gaza, and whatever is happening there may topple our government, we may lose the whole gravy train. Right now, we're sitting in the West Bank, we're collecting dollars, all of us are getting rich. Sure, we're not popular on the Palestinian street, but we survive and we get paid and we're corrupt and we're happy. If we take this, we actually have to rebuild Gaza, which is a huge project, and they will hate us and they might kill us and we're going to lose the power anyways. So no. So I think the question here is, if that's not the case, who is? If Egypt is never going to do this, if Jordan is never going to do this, if the Palestinian Authority is not interested in this, who may? Well, certainly any of these three can potentially end up in Gaza because this is the Middle East. So, despite not wanting it, it might happen. But what seems to be the best solution right now is a little bit out of the box. And I've mentioned this in my previous video. You see, Gaza can be divided into 6 families, 6 hamulas that own a certain part of Gaza. You give them autonomy. You give them almost an autonomic state inside their city, like an emirate, much like they have in the UAE. And those specific emirates get to self-govern with a small police force, only handguns or tasers, whatever that may be, and with Israeli support on top as the security responsibility over not having to breed more terrorists out of that place. With the financial support and backing of the Gulf countries like the UAE and the Saudis, and with the quiet cooperation of Egypt on the other side. That can actually work. Now, of course, I may be wrong, so comment below and let me know if you agree or disagree. Just keep it respectful. Now, as always, I just want to mention these videos are not monetized because this is sensitive topics. If you want to support this channel, you're more than welcome to do so. We have an option to join as channel members. Of course, we know times are tight, so if you just want to support the channel and you can't afford to do that, that's fine. Just share the videos with more people who want to get educated in this. It's more than enough. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next video.